So I've made more mistakes in buying and selling real estate than most people will make in their lifetime. As a real estate agent, as a YouTuber, people often look at me as someone that's constantly educating on the real estate space, thinking I've never had a bad day, I've never been where you've been, I've never failed at owning property, I didn't go through the last housing crash, when in all reality, that couldn't be further from the truth. In today's video, I want to walk you through 3 different properties I've owned. Now, keep in mind, I've actually owned more than 3, and there are more mistakes that I'm actually not mentioning in this video, but I want to walk you through 3 different stories on investment property and my primary home with the hopes that it will help you understand my position on education, on real estate education, why it's so important, and why I constantly preach about the same 3 things when buying a home. So to start, I'm going to talk about 2 different investment properties that I purchased, and then we'll talk about my primary home. And the primary home is probably the one where I lost the most amount of money, over $600,000, and there's some valuable lessons to be learned there, so make sure you stay until the end. So the 2 investment properties, the first one that I purchased was back in '06. This property was purchased in Boise, Idaho. Why Boise, Idaho? In fact, at that time, I had an investor that was buying a lot of properties in different areas where he saw potential growth in the long run. Some of those markets at the time were St. George, were Surprise, Arizona, were Las Vegas, Boise, Idaho, and these are all markets that crashed pretty hard during the Great Recession, and that's why you might know some of these names. But I was buying a property in Boise, Idaho with the idea of renting that property out. So I purchased that property for around $200,000. In fact, I tried to go find the exact numbers for you, but Idaho's a non-disclosure state and I couldn't find the information, but it was around $200,000 at that time. And I went in minimal down payment. At that time, the housing market was crazy, right? You could go in and buy a house with a very small amount down, even on an investment property. So back in that time, I believe I put 10% down to purchase that property, which was around $20,000 or so, and got a renter immediately, had a property manager up in the area, and everything was going great, right? Tenant was making their payments on time. Everything was going exactly like it should. And as the housing market started to crash in '08, I got fearful. I was worried. At that time, I was actually a mortgage broker, which many of you guys know. That's why I talk a lot about mortgages on my channel. I owned a mortgage company, and my business was getting hammered at that time, right? I went from a very successful mortgage broker to making enough money just to cover the bills, if you will. And I got fearful with regards to having multiple properties out there. And we'll talk about some of these other properties here in just a moment. But this particular property, the mortgage every single month was actually being covered by the rent payment. So I wasn't upside down, but I saw house prices crashing all around me. And I got scared and worried and decided that I didn't want to hold on to this piece of real estate. So I decided to sell it. And it took some time to end up selling that property. It ended up being a short sale. I continued to make the payments the entire time. I never stopped making the payments because I knew how important it was on my credit to continue making those payments. So I continued making the payments even during the process of short sale. In fact, the tenant of that property ended up purchasing that property, and I believe they bought that property for somewhere around $140,000, $150,000, so about 25% less than I paid for the property at the time of purchase. Now, again, I sold this property back in 2010, 2011-ish, right? Which was about 10 years ago, just over 10 years ago at this point, and I looked up the value today on Zillow, and guess what? That property today is worth around $406,000. So because I got fearful and worried about, the economy around me, even though the mortgage was being paid every single month by the tenant, I ended up selling it for a lot less money than I could had I just held on to that property. And that's one thing I talk about a lot in videos, is how important time is. If you're looking in the short run, time is likely your biggest obstacle. A lot of people are worried about timing the market when they actually should be worrying about time. How long are they going to be in that property? So in this case, it was an investment property. I didn't live in it, but the story reads the same at the end of the day, where I ended up selling it for $50,000 less than I bought it. And that property is worth about $250,000 more today, more than double of what I purchased that property for back in the day. And had I just kept that property, I would have been able to take advantage of that equity and likely rising rents over that period of time. Many of you know what the Boise market's done over the last couple of years, how much it shot up with regards to appreciation, with regards to rental payments. And so time is something that I missed out on because of where my mind was at that time. Now, I know there's people out there watching this going, Jeb, well, if you didn't see the crash coming last time, what makes you think it's any different this time? Well, that time was a different environment entirely, with low down payment loans, liar loans, all of that stuff. Plus, us in the mortgage business, we knew something was coming. We knew what they were doing wasn't going to last. I just don't think any of us knew the exact timing on it. So it wasn't that we didn't think it was going to happen. We knew it was going to happen. We just didn't know when it was going to happen. This time, it's entirely different because the housing market has been built on fundamentals: strong credit, strong down payments, all of that stuff. Now, I know at the moment the comments are probably blowing up. All of these people, the haters out there, if you will, saying, Jeb, I told you, the housing market is going to crash. You've made the mistakes, all of that stuff, right? Yeah, I've made mistakes in full transparency, and I'm trying to use this as a guide so that people don't make the same mistakes again, and people understand that you can come back from mistakes like that and actually build long-term generational wealth by buying property again, exactly what I'm doing now. Now, the second story is similar. This was an investment property in Lexington, Kentucky. Now, I purchased this property for around $173,000, and the story is more or less the same. The rent coming in every month was more or less covering the mortgage payment, and I got scared. Again, I owned 4 different pieces of property at that time, including my primary home and a property in Miami, Florida, which we'll talk about in more detail in another video. But this property in Lexington, similar story. I ended up selling the property on a short sale when the whole time the rent was actually covering the mortgage payment, but that property sold for $143,000-ish. Don't remember the number exactly, but quite a bit less than I had purchased it for. And today that property's worth $322,000. So nearly double what I paid for that property just 10 years ago. So holding that property and just allowing time to pass would have gotten me to a point where not only had I paid down the principal considerably, I would have had double the appreciation from when I purchased it. Now, the last property we're going to talk about was my primary home at this time. Now, this property is a whole different story in and of itself, and I'm sure people are lighting up the comments already talking about, hey, Jeb is a YouTuber, he's a real estate educator, he's been, through the process and sold property for less and made mistakes. Yeah, I'm doing this in full transparency to let you know that even me, somebody that does this day in and day out, I've made mistakes in the past, but the key here is that I learn from those mistakes, right? Not to make those again. And that's what I'm trying to do with my channel, is to educate you guys, to guide you through the process and help you understand how to make the right decisions when it's the right time for you to buy a house. I worked in sweatshop with regards to mortgage companies, and I saw people getting ripped off all the time. And that's why I stress all the time about mortgages and trying to provide education so that you as a consumer don't have to deal with that sort of thing. And I hope the story that I tell now also gives you a little bit of insight and helps you if you're in a position where you're thinking about buying a property, or maybe you've been in this situation and you're scared about the market and don't want to make the same decision again. I completely get it, right? I've been there. So this particular property I bought back in 2006. Now, I was newly married just a couple of years, and we both worked in the mortgage business. I owned a mortgage company. She was a wholesale account executive for a large subprime company out there, making a lot of money. And we decided to sell our property at that time down in South County, Orange County in Mission Viejo, and buy a property up in Huntington Beach. And the property we decided to buy was a new construction property just a few blocks from the ocean. And at the time, this property was listed at $1.575 million. So $1.6 million wasn't even finished construction yet. We actually knew the builder, and my then wife wanted this property. She wanted to purchase it, and I didn't really say anything, and we proceeded to move forward. We ended up putting 20% down on this property and buying it and living there for a couple of years. And then, as you know, the market changed, prices shifted downward considerably, and we were then sitting in a property that was upside down quite a bit because we had literally purchased at the top of the market. About June, July of 06 was really the peak in real estate, and that's when we closed on this property. So from the date we purchased it, the value of that property continued to decline. decline. And not only did that decline, our marriage ended up declining as well, and we ended up going our separate ways. But now we have this particular property that's worth a lot less, and we need to sell that property. So we end up selling this property for $985,000. That's about $600,000 less than we purchased this home just 4 or 5 years before. So you might say, well, Jeb, why didn't you just hang on to it? Well, I wasn't in a position by myself to keep that property because of the mortgage payment. She didn't want the property looking at the property value versus what it was worth. And at the time, she could go rent something. I could go rent something for significantly less money than it costs to keep that property. And so that's what we did. We decided it was best to get rid of the property, and that's what happened. And $600,000 later, the property sells for $985,000. Now keep in mind, a large percentage of that was our down payment. The other portion of that was the bank ended up losing money on this deal. And it was a hard time, right? So we separated, and I exited this deal with about $20,000. Now, for many of you out there, you're like, $20,000, that's a lot of money. Well, I came out of a situation where we were making a lot of money. We had a lot of money in the bank and decided to part ways. I went my way, she went hers, and it was time for me to start over. And so in doing this video, I looked up the value of this property today. I'm in this market, so I'm constantly following what the values are anyway, but the property today is worth about $2 million. So it went from 1.6 down to roughly $1 million. And then today, about 10 years after I sold the property, it's back up $400,000 above where we bought the property back in 06. So again, holding onto that property long term not only would have gotten us back to even, but would have allowed us to reap the rewards of the appreciation over that period of time. And keep in mind, guys, this was the largest crash in history, the largest housing crash in history, where prices literally in some cases went down 50%. And within a 10, 12, 13-year period, home prices not only came back to where they were at the peak, they've actually surpassed that. And that's another thing that I want to point out in today's video. I often talk about 3 things that you have to consider when buying real estate. Time. You have to have time on your side. I always say 5, 7, 10 years. The longer amount of time, the more time you have on your side, the better off you'll be. The second thing, you need to have money in the bank in case things go wrong, in case you lose your job, your wife loses your job, you're the only person that's able to make that payment. You need to have money in the bank for that rainy day. And lastly, stretching yourself. You need to be in a position where you're not stretching yourself, where every single dollar is going towards that mortgage payment, where you're really living house poor. Now, I've made all of these mistakes where I got scared, didn't think I wanted to be a property owner because of everything happening around me, ended up selling it, going through the situation of divorce, not having the reserves, not having the ability to continue making that payment because of the situation. And so that's why I come to you preaching these things, because it is important. After 2 years of record appreciation of nearly 35-40%, we're likely to see home prices move sideways down in some markets. But if you have time on your side, you'll end up setting yourself up for success. And that's how the wealthy and those that own real estate long-term end up creating generational wealth. So with that said, I'd love to know your thoughts. What do you think about this type of video? It's obviously different than anything I've done in the past. Did you go through something similar? What did you learn? I think it's important to help people understand, to educate them so that they don't make the same mistakes. And lastly, what I'll say is it's okay to make mistakes. It's okay to have failure. I'm not coming to you as someone who's never had a bad day or never been in a position where, it's tough to buy a home or been upside down on my home or any of that stuff. I'm coming to you in full transparency to help you understand the importance of real estate and having that longer term time horizon. So hopefully that was helpful in me being vulnerable, providing you a little bit of insight as to where I've been, why real estate education is important to me, and why having a longer term time horizon is also important. But if you want to know my thoughts on the housing market at the moment, buying or selling, do me a favor and check out this video here.